Daniel was a young police officer who always wanted to prove himself. He was new on the force, still learning, still nervous inside, but he tried to hide his fear behind a serious face. On a warm afternoon, he received a radio call about a vehicle that matched the description of a car involved in a small hit and run. It wasn't a dangerous crime, but Daniel wanted to show he could handle everything perfectly. So when he saw a dark blue sedan turning onto the main road, he quickly switched on his sirens and signaled for the driver to pull over. The car stopped slowly near the sidewalk, and Daniel felt a rush of adrenaline. To him, this was his moment to act like a real officer. He stepped out of his police cruiser, adjusted his uniform and walked toward the parked car. The sun was bright, the air was dry, and the road was busy with people watching from their vehicles. Daniel's heart beat fast, but he kept his voice cold and firm. He stopped at the driver's window and knocked once. Inside, he saw a black woman sitting quietly, her hands already placed on the steering wheel where he could see them. Her calmness confused him for a second, but he ignored the feeling. He wanted to be in control and he didn't want to look soft. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle," he ordered even before asking any questions. The woman nodded gently without arguing. She looked older than him, maybe in her 40s, with tired but warm eyes. Daniel did not recognize her. To him, she was just another civilian he had to handle. She opened the door and stepped out slowly, not making any sudden movement. Daniel noticed she didn't speak, and for some reason that silence made him uneasy. He assumed she was hiding something. His mind filled with all the things he learned in training. Never trust complete silence. When she finally looked up at him, it was only for a brief second, like she was searching his face for something. Daniel felt strange, like her eyes knew something about him that he didn't know himself. But he shook that thought away. His job was to stay focused. So he raised his voice a little, wanting to sound stronger. People were already glancing from their cars, slowing down to see what was happening. A few pedestrians had stopped walking. Daniel felt their eyes on him and thought he needed to look authoritative. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them," he said sharply. The woman nodded again. Still quiet. Still calm. She wasn't resisting, but Daniel's nerves made him treat the situation as more serious than it was. He asked her for her ID, and the woman slowly reached into her purse. Daniel's partner, Officer Price, stood behind him watching. Price had more experience, and he seemed unsure if Daniel was handling things the right way, but he didn't interfere yet. When Daniel glanced at the ID, the name on it felt familiar, but his mind was too focused on his fear of losing control that he didn't process the memory. Instead, he made a sudden decision that changed everything. He told her to step away from the car. She followed. Then he said the words that shocked the people watching from their cars. "Kneel on the ground." There was a short silence. The kind that makes the world pause. The woman didn't argue. She didn't resist. She simply lowered herself to her knees on the rough asphalt. Her clothes brushed the dirt, her knees pressed against the hot road, but she stayed still. Daniel felt a small victory inside himself. He thought he was managing a potentially dangerous suspect. Price frowned but didn't say anything. The drivers who had slowed down started recording on their phones. Some were whispering that this looked unnecessary. One man in a red truck rolled down his window and shouted, "Hey, she didn't do anything." Daniel ignored him. The woman lifted her head slightly, her eyes still calm, still soft, and for a tiny moment, Daniel felt something hit his chest, a strange sensation he couldn't name. It was like seeing someone from a dream he had forgotten. He took a step closer, and for the first time he actually looked at her face. Really looked. Her cheeks, her eyes, the small scar near her eyebrow, and something in his mind tugged at him. But Daniel pushed the feeling away again. He was too caught up in the role he thought he needed to play. He asked her if she knew why she was stopped. She didn't speak, only shook her head. Her silence frustrated him even more. He wanted answers. He wanted respect. He wanted control. He didn't know his life was about to shift completely. A small group of people had gathered on the sidewalk now, whispering, watching, recording. Many of them looked uncomfortable with the scene. The woman kept her hands visible and her back straight, even though the heat from the road burned her skin. Her quietness wasn't fear. It wasn't defiance. It felt like she was waiting for something, waiting for Daniel to recognize something he hadn't yet remembered. And then, from the corner of the crowd, a man shouted something that froze the entire moment. "That's Miss Evelyn. What are you doing? She helped kids in this community." Daniel's heart skipped. Miss Evelyn? The name hit him like lightning. Suddenly, the familiarity made sense. Suddenly, the past he had buried under his badge began to rise again. But the shock, the realization, the truth, Those belong to the next part of the story. Because in that moment, Daniel had no idea he was humiliating the same woman who once saved him from destroying his own life. Daniel stood frozen for a moment after hearing the man shout the name, Miss Evelyn, but he forced himself to ignore it. He told himself he must stay focused, that he couldn't let a random stranger distract him. Still, something deep inside him felt shaken. His hand trembled slightly, but he hid it behind his body as he walked around the woman, trying to act confident. Officer Price noticed his uneasiness and stepped closer, his eyebrows lowered with concern. But Price still didn't interfere, thinking Daniel just needed experience. The woman stayed on her knees, silent and composed, even though people around her were whispering with growing discomfort. Cars slowed down, some honking out of frustration, others stopping altogether to record the scene. But the woman didn't react to any of it. She only watched Daniel's face with a calm expression that somehow made him more nervous. It felt like she knew something he didn't. Like she was waiting for him to finally see the truth. Daniel cleared his throat and tried to speak in a steady voice. "Ma'am, I need you to answer some questions." But the words came out sharper than he intended. The woman looked down and shook her head slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with a quiet breath. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't disrespect. It was something else, something Daniel still couldn't read. A few people in the crowd spoke up. "Officer, she's not resisting. Why is she on her knees? This is too much." Each comment added pressure to Daniel's chest, making him feel like he was losing control of the situation. He tried to block out the voices, but his mind kept replaying the name he had heard, Miss Evelyn. Why did it bother him so much? Why did it feel like a door in his memory was slowly creaking open? Suddenly, the stranger who had shouted earlier stepped closer from the sidewalk. He was a tall man in his late 30s with a worried expression. "Officer, please, that's Evelyn Brooks. She helped my younger brother when he was in trouble. She's a social worker, not a criminal." His voice trembled with a mixture of fear and anger. Daniel felt a wave of confusion. Evelyn Brooks. The name felt heavier now, like it carried years of forgotten history. He looked at the woman more carefully, studying her face, her posture, the softness in her eyes. Something inside him whispered that he knew her, but he couldn't place from where. His memories were blurry, like trying to look through fog. Before he could respond, Officer Price stepped in. "Daniel, maybe we should slow down. Something feels off." His tone was calm but serious. Price rarely questioned anyone's decisions, so this warning carried weight. Daniel felt irritated by the doubt but also scared of making a mistake in front of the crowd. He took a deep breath and snapped, "Let me handle this." Price stepped back reluctantly, though he still watched the woman with concern. Daniel turned to the woman again. "Ma'am, why aren't you saying anything? Are you refusing to answer?" His voice cracked slightly, revealing his growing anxiety. The woman raised her chin, finally meeting his eyes. Her gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid. It was sad, painfully sad, like she was looking at someone she once knew deeply. And that sadness struck Daniel harder than any shouted insult could have. He felt something wash over him, something cold and familiar. A memory surfaced. His younger self sitting in a small, cozy office with colorful posters on the walls. A warm voice telling him he was not broken, that he could still choose a better path. A gentle hand offering him tissues while he cried about his father leaving. He blinked fast, pushing the memory away. No, it couldn't be her. It was impossible. But his heart began to race and his breathing grew shallow. The stranger from the crowd spoke again, louder this time. "She used to help kids from bad homes. She helped me too. You're making a mistake, officer." His voice shook with frustration. Daniel stepped back, feeling dizzy. The woman's silence suddenly felt personal, like she wasn't staying quiet because she was hiding something, but because she knew exactly who he was. She knew the little boy who used to come to her office with bruised knuckles and a trembling voice. She knew the teenager who once promised her he would grow into a man she could be proud of. Now he was the one forcing her onto the ground. Daniel swallowed hard, staring at her ID again. Evelyn Brooks. Yes, that was her name. He remembered it now. He remembered her eyes. He remembered her voice telling him to be better than the world around him. His chest tightened painfully. But the moment of truth hadn't arrived yet. He wasn't ready to accept it. He wasn't ready to admit the woman he humiliated in public was the woman who saved his life years ago. He was still trying to convince himself this was just a coincidence, unaware that part 3 would tear down the final wall between his past and his present. Daniel felt sweat forming on his forehead even though the afternoon breeze had grown cooler. The more he looked at the woman kneeling on the road, the more familiar her face became. But he couldn't accept it yet. Not in front of a crowd. Not while cameras were pointed at him. His pride, his fear, and his training all mixed into a storm inside his chest, making it hard for him to breathe. The woman, Evelyn Brooks, kept her hands visible and steady, her knees pressing against the rough asphalt. She didn't raise her voice or show anger. She simply waited, like she had done many times before with troubled kids. She waited for Daniel to face the truth on his own. But Daniel wasn't ready. He turned away from her, trying to think clearly, but his mind refused to cooperate. People on the sidewalk whispered louder now. A few shouted angry comments. Someone yelled, "She doesn't deserve this." Another person said, "Officer, you're going too far." Daniel's jaw tightened. Every voice felt like a knife cutting into the shaky authority he was holding on to. He wanted silence. He wanted control. He wanted the moment to stop spinning out of his hands. Officer Price walked closer and spoke quietly so the crowd wouldn't hear. "Daniel, look at her again. Really look." His tone wasn't accusing. It was worried. Price had never seen Daniel act so tense before. Daniel turned his head slightly and met Price's eyes. For a moment, Daniel almost confessed everything. His doubts, the strange familiarity, the fear that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But then the shout of another angry bystander snapped him back. "Let her stand up. She's not a threat." Daniel's pride took over again. He couldn't look weak. He couldn't give in just because people were yelling. So he straightened his back and walked closer to Evelyn, trying to pretend he was calm. But his voice shook when he spoke. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask some questions. I need you to respond." Evelyn lifted her eyes slowly. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was almost heartbreaking, like a mother looking at her grown child who had forgotten everything she once taught him. Her silence wasn't stubbornness. It was pain. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again. Daniel frowned. Why wasn't she speaking? Why didn't she defend herself? Why did she seem like she knew more about him than he knew about her? Then she finally whispered, barely audible, "Daniel." One word. One name. His name. Daniel stepped back like she had struck him. His heart slammed against his ribs. What did you call me?" he asked, voice trembling. Evelyn looked at him with tired eyes. "Daniel," she repeated softly, "is that not your name?" The crowd went silent for a moment. Price's eyes widened. Daniel stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. She knew him. She recognized him. Just like the stranger from before had said, she wasn't a random civilian. She wasn't a criminal. She was someone with a past tied to his own. He stared at her face, the gentle eyes, the soft wrinkles at the corners, the familiar warmth he once relied on during the hardest years of his life. Memories broke through his denial. He remembered sitting in her office as a scared teenager, fists clenched, tears running down his face. He remembered her calming voice, telling him he could rise above his anger. He remembered her writing encouraging notes for him, helping him apply for programs, guiding him when he was close to throwing his life away. She was his mentor. And now she was kneeling before him on the hot road because of him. Daniel shook his head, trying to make sense of what he had done. He wanted to speak, but his voice failed him. He took another step back, his legs shaky. Officer Price whispered, "Daniel, if she knows your name, then—" "I know her," Daniel said hoarsely, cutting him off. "I know her, Price. I know who she is." A gasp spread through the crowd as his words reached the nearest people. Phones lifted higher. Eyes widened. A few people exchanged shocked looks. Daniel felt his world shrinking around him. He crouched down slowly, not caring how it looked anymore. His pride broke. His uniform didn't matter. The crowd didn't matter. The cameras didn't matter. He looked into Evelyn's eyes and whispered, "Miss Evelyn, is it really you?" She nodded gently. Her lips trembled slightly, not from fear but from sadness. "Yes, Daniel. It's me." Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Memories rushed in faster now. Her smile when he passed his exams, her tears when he lost his best friend, the way she believed in him when no one else did. She had been like a lifeline in his darkest years. And he had forced her to kneel in the middle of the street. His throat burned. His palms shook. For the first time since the traffic stop began, Daniel felt his authority fall away, leaving only guilt, shame, and a painful realization. He hadn't just humiliated a woman. He had humiliated the woman who once saved him. And the real consequences of that choice were only beginning. The world around Daniel felt like it had stopped moving. Cars still drove by, people still murmured, cameras still recorded, but to him, everything had gone silent. All he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he stared at Evelyn, the woman he once trusted more than anyone. He couldn't believe what he had done. He couldn't believe she was really there, kneeling on the rough asphalt because of him. But while Daniel's world froze, the world around him began to stir dangerously. A man from the sidewalk, maybe in his 40s with paint stains on his work shirt, stepped forward with trembling anger. "Officer, this is wrong. She's done nothing to deserve this," he shouted, pointing at Evelyn. "She helped our whole neighborhood for years." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. Before he could respond, another woman shouted from a parked car, "Let her stand up. Don't you recognize her?" Someone else muttered, "He doesn't care. Power gets to their heads." The pressure hit Daniel like a wave. It felt like every mistake he ever made was now standing in front of him. Cameras zoomed in on his face. Whispers turned into accusations. The crowd grew louder, angrier, more impatient. He felt his hands shake again and he hid them behind his belt, hoping no one would notice. Officer Price, sensing the situation slipping out of control, stepped in front of Daniel and faced the crowd. "Everyone please step back," he commanded. "Let us handle this." But the crowd didn't trust him anymore. Their eyes were sharp, questioning, accusing. They had seen too much already. To them, this was no longer just a traffic stop. It was injustice happening in front of their eyes. And the tension kept rising. One young man started recording Daniel directly. "Say something, officer," he said. "Why is she kneeling? What did she do?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was tight, his mind spinning. He kept looking at Evelyn, who remained calm even as strangers defended her louder than she defended herself. Then something unexpected happened. A middle-aged woman with curly hair and a medical badge clipped to her shirt hurried through the crowd. She looked like she had just left a clinic nearby. She stumbled onto the road, eyes wide with disbelief. "Evelyn?" she gasped. "Evelyn Brooks? Is that you?" Evelyn lifted her head gently and managed a small nod. The woman covered her mouth with her hands. "No, no, no, no. You cannot do this to her," she cried toward the officers. "She runs support groups, she counsels teens, she writes grant proposals for our shelters. She saved hundreds of lives." Price blinked in confusion. "Saved what?" The woman pointed directly at Daniel. "Ask him. She saved his life too, didn't she?" Daniel felt thousands of eyes turn to him at once. His face burned. His stomach twisted. He couldn't hide anymore. He whispered, barely audible, "Yes, she did." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Price stared at Daniel, stunned. "Is this true?" Daniel nodded slowly, afraid to speak again. Afraid his voice would crack. Afraid the truth would fall apart the moment it left his lips. Evelyn watched him with sadness but also with something softer. Something like forgiveness trying to find its way through pain. The crowd, however, wasn't so forgiving. Voices rose sharply. "You made your own mentor kneel? You should be ashamed. Take responsibility. This is why people don't trust cops." Daniel felt the weight of every word. It felt like stones thrown at him, not physically but emotionally. Every shout broke another piece inside him. He wasn't just losing control of the scene. He was losing the respect he had worked so hard to earn. Price tried to calm things down, raising his hands. "We are going to review the situation," he said loudly. "Everyone give us space." But no one moved. The anger in the air had turned into something heavy, something dangerous. The crowd wanted answers, answers Daniel wasn't ready to give. Evelyn slowly lifted her hands higher. "Please," she said softly, "everyone, let him breathe." Her gentle voice stunned the crowd into a brief silence. Even in humiliation, even kneeling on the road, she was trying to protect him. The same way she protected him years ago. Daniel felt his chest tighten painfully. He didn't deserve her kindness. Not now. Not ever. He stepped forward, trembling, ready to undo the damage, but before he could speak, someone in the back yelled, "I'm calling internal affairs." Another voice yelled, "I'm sending this video to the news." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, backup responding to the commotion. The situation was spiraling fast, and Daniel realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a bad traffic stop anymore. This was about to become a national headline. And the truth behind their connection, the truth that could destroy or save him, had not even been revealed yet. Daniel felt the world closing in on him as the distant sirens grew louder. Backup was coming, and with it, more eyes, more judgment, more questions he wasn't ready to answer. He stood frozen in the middle of the road while Evelyn remained on her knees, calm and unshaken, as if she had already accepted whatever storm was coming. Her serenity only made Daniel feel smaller. He had once admired her strength. Now he feared it because it reflected everything he had failed to be. Officer Price leaned toward Daniel. "We need to clear this up before backup arrives," he whispered urgently. "We can't let them walk into a riot." But Daniel barely heard him. His mind was spinning, flashes of childhood trauma, Evelyn's comforting voice, the warm office where he found refuge, her encouraging words that kept him from joining a gang. She was the person who told him, "Choose the kind of man you want to become." And he had just proven he chose the wrong one. He finally crouched down beside Evelyn, lowering himself closer to her level. Cameras zoomed in instantly, capturing the moment. People held their breath. But all Daniel saw was the woman who saved his life, kneeling because of him. "Miss Evelyn," he whispered, voice trembling, "please, you can stand." I shouldn't have." His throat closed. He couldn't even form a sentence. Evelyn looked at him with gentle eyes. Not angry, not accusing, just deeply sad. "Daniel," she said softly, "I'm fine. You don't have to do this." Her calmness felt like a knife twisting in his chest. How could she be so gentle when he had treated her like a suspect, like a threat, like a stranger? "I remember you," Daniel said, the words shaking out of him. "I didn't recognize you at first, but I remember everything now." Evelyn lowered her gaze, sadness deepening. "I knew you didn't recognize me. That's why I didn't speak. I wanted you to see on your own." The crowd murmured. Some watched with pity. Some with anger. Some with disbelief that an officer could kneel beside the same woman he forced to the ground. Daniel swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. This isn't who I wanted to be." Evelyn touched his arm softly, the same way she did when he was a troubled teen sitting in her office. "Then change," she said. "It's never too late." Before Daniel could respond, a black SUV screeched to a stop near them. Out stepped Sergeant Collins, broad-shouldered, intimidating, and known for being strict about procedure. This was the last person Daniel wanted to see right now. Collins marched over, eyes narrowed. "What's going on here?" he barked, looking at the crowd, then at Daniel kneeling beside Evelyn. A few bystanders shouted at him immediately. "Your officer made a community worker kneel. She didn't do anything wrong. We have it all recorded." Collins's face darkened. "Price. Explain." Price stepped forward quickly. "Sir, the situation escalated." "Escalated?" Collins growled. "This looks like a PR nightmare." Daniel opened his mouth, but Collins cut him off. "Officer Daniels, step away from the civilian." His tone was sharp, cold, and public. Cameras were still rolling, capturing every second. Daniel hesitated, his loyalty to his badge wrestling with his guilt. Slowly he stood up but stayed close to Evelyn. His hands felt numb. His mind screamed at him to speak up, to tell the truth, but fear held his tongue. Collins turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, did this officer threaten or mistreat you?" The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Everyone expected her to say yes. The evidence was all over the internet now. People were angry for her. They wanted justice, accountability, a confession from the woman herself. But Evelyn looked up quietly and shook her head. "No," she said softly. Gasps erupted. "What? How?" "She's protecting him." Collins frowned. "Are you sure? We can file a complaint if—" "I'm sure," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "I am not here to destroy him." Daniel felt tears burn his eyes. He looked away quickly, ashamed. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned her head slightly, facing the crowd as much as she faced the officers. "I am here because I believe people can still learn," she said quietly. "Even when they fail. Even when they fall." Silence washed over the road. Her words cut through the tension like warm light in a cold room. Daniel felt his heart crack open. But Sergeant Collins was unmoved. "Regardless of her statement, you still violated protocol, Daniels," he said harshly. "You forced a civilian to kneel without cause. There will be an internal review." Daniel closed his eyes. He deserved that. He deserved worse. But Evelyn spoke again, her tone calm but firm. "Let him face the review," she said. "Let him answer for his actions. That's how he will grow." She wasn't defending him. She was guiding him again, just like before. And Daniel knew this moment would change the rest of his life. Daniel felt the weight of Sergeant Collins's words settle on him like a mountain. Internal review meant consequences. It meant paperwork, suspension, interviews, scrutiny, and possibly losing the badge he believed had given him purpose. But standing there beside Evelyn, his former mentor, the woman who once saved his life, he realized something painful. Maybe he didn't deserve to wear that badge until he became the man she always hoped he would be. Backup officers arrived, forming a cautious circle around the scene. Some were confused, some irritated, some wary of the crowd growing louder by the minute. Phones remained raised, capturing every expression, every gesture, every silence. The world was already watching. Evelyn slowly pushed herself up from her knees. Daniel instinctively reached forward to help her, but she lifted her hand gently, stopping him. She wanted to stand by her own strength. She wanted him to see she wasn't fragile, and that her dignity came from within. Price stepped closer and whispered, "Daniel, we need to move her off the road. This crowd is becoming unpredictable." Evelyn nodded and took a step toward the sidewalk. Her legs shook slightly from kneeling too long, but she kept her posture straight. The crowd parted for her like she was someone sacred. Many recognized her now, people she had helped, families she had supported, teens she had mentored. Their faces softened as she walked past them. Daniel followed a few steps behind, feeling every eye burning into him. Once she reached the sidewalk, Evelyn leaned lightly on a bench. Her breathing was slow but steady, her expression calm despite everything. Daniel stopped a few feet away, hands trembling, unsure whether he was allowed to speak, allowed to approach, allowed to even exist in her space after what he had done. Sergeant Collins turned angrily toward Daniel. "Stand over there," he barked, pointing sharply. "You're not to interact with the civilian until statements are taken." But Evelyn spoke quietly, "Let him stay." Collins glared at her. "Ma'am, with respect." "I said let him stay," she repeated, her tone calm but firm. It was the voice of someone who had guided countless troubled souls, and never needed to shout to be heard. Collins clenched his jaw but stepped back. Even he knew arguing with her would only make the situation worse. Daniel approached slowly, stopping about 2 feet from her. "Miss Evelyn." "I don't know how to even begin apologizing," he whispered. Evelyn looked at him fully now, her eyes soft but filled with a deep sadness. "Daniel," she said, "an apology starts with honesty, not fear." Daniel swallowed hard. "I acted out of pride," he admitted. "I acted without thinking. I wanted to look strong. I wanted to prove myself. And I hurt you. I embarrassed you. I humiliated the same woman who once lifted me up when I was broken." Evelyn listened quietly, her expression unreadable. He continued, voice cracking. "I forgot where I came from. I forgot who helped shape me. I forgot you." Evelyn's gaze lowered slightly. "I never wanted you to remember me because of guilt," she said softly. "I wanted you to remember who you were capable of becoming." Daniel's voice trembled. "I failed that." "No," she said gently, "you lost your way, but losing your way is not the end. It's a chance to return to the right path." Daniel blinked back tears. "How can you forgive me so easily? After what I did?" "Forgiveness is not weakness," Evelyn replied. "It is clarity. If I hold hatred, I become part of the cycle we fight against. I refuse to be part of that cycle." Her words hit him harder than any punishment ever could. Before Daniel could speak again, another siren approached, this time a different tone. A sleek black vehicle pulled up, and out stepped Chief Hernandez, the highest-ranking officer in their district. The crowd reacted instantly, some hopeful, some angry, some ready for justice. Hernandez walked directly toward Evelyn, not Daniel. "Ma'am, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" she asked with genuine concern. Evelyn shook her head. "I'm fine." Hernandez then turned to Daniel, her expression unreadable but stern. "Officer Daniels, you and I will talk privately." Immediately. Daniel nodded, his stomach twisting. This was it, the real consequences. But before he followed her, Evelyn said quietly, "Daniel." He turned. "Remember who you wanted to be," she said. "Not who the world pressured you to become." Her words stayed in his chest like a heartbeat. Daniel walked toward the chief's car, each step heavy with guilt, fear, and something else, something new. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was the beginning of becoming the man he should have been all along. Either way, he knew Part 7 would change everything. Daniel followed Chief Hernandez toward her vehicle like a man walking toward judgment. His legs felt heavy, his lungs tight. Every step reminded him of the moment he forced Evelyn, his mentor, his lifeline, to kneel on the road like a criminal. Nothing he could say would erase that image, not from his mind, not from the crowd, not from the cameras that had already captured it forever. Hernandez opened the back door of the SUV and motioned him inside. She didn't yell. Her silence was worse. It meant she was watching him carefully, thinking, calculating. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and controlled. "Daniel, tell me exactly what happened." Daniel stared at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. His voice came out shaky. "I misread the situation. I acted too fast, too forcefully. I didn't recognize who she was until later." "Later," Hernandez repeated, her tone sharp. "After you had her kneeling on the ground in public. After half the city recorded it." Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, Chief." Hernandez leaned closer. "Why?" That one word hit like a punch. Because Daniel didn't have one clean reason. He had 10 messy ones. His pride, his fear, his insecurity, his inexperience, his need to look strong, his panic, his silence. All tangled together in a knot he couldn't untie. He opened his mouth but no words came. Hernandez sighed deeply. "Then let me rephrase. What were you thinking?" Daniel finally whispered, "I wanted to prove I wasn't weak." Hernandez's eyes narrowed. "By humiliating a peaceful woman twice your age?" Daniel closed his eyes. Shame burned inside him like fire. But Hernandez wasn't finished. "And not just any woman," she added quietly. "The woman who mentored you. Who kept you out of jail. Who helped you get into the academy." Daniel's head dropped. "Yes, Chief." Hernandez stared at him for a long, heavy moment. "You owe the department an explanation. And you owe her more than that." "I know," he whispered. "Internal Affairs will investigate," she said. "But before we go further, I want to know something." Her voice softened, not with kindness but with seriousness. "Do you believe you're still fit to wear that uniform?" The question pierced him. He had dreamed of being a police officer since he was 16. He thought he could help people. He thought he could change his community. But today all he had done was hurt the person who helped him find that dream. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the window of the SUV, at the crowd still gathered on the sidewalk, at Evelyn sitting quietly with her hands clasped, at the community protecting her. Finally he whispered, "I don't know." Hernandez nodded once. "That's the first honest thing you've said today." Before Daniel could respond, the SUV door opened. Evelyn stood outside, leaning slightly on the bench she had sat on earlier. She had insisted on walking over herself. She did not ask permission. She simply approached. Hernandez straightened immediately. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be standing. You should rest." But Evelyn shook her head. "I need to speak to him." Hernandez stepped aside. Daniel felt breathless as Evelyn climbed in slowly and sat across from him. Her presence filled the small space, quiet, steady, powerful. He had once sat across from her in a very different room years ago as a broken boy. And now here they were again, except he was the one who had caused the damage. She looked at him with soft but serious eyes. "Daniel," she said gently, "look at me." "You did. You lost yourself today," she said softly. "But losing yourself does not mean you cannot find your way again." He shook his head. "I don't deserve that. I don't deserve forgiveness." Evelyn's voice remained calm. "Forgiveness is not about deserving. It is about choosing peace over anger." "But I hurt you," Daniel whispered. "I hurt you in front of your own community." "Yes," she said honestly. "And that pain is real. But so is your remorse." His eyes flooded with tears he could no longer hold back. Evelyn continued, "You think strength is loud, forceful, unshakable. But real strength is quiet. Real strength listens. Real strength admits mistakes." "I forgot that," Daniel whispered. "Then remember it now," she said gently. "And decide who you want to be from this moment onward." Daniel felt something inside him shift, a painful but necessary shift. Hernandez watched quietly, realizing she was witnessing something she could never put in a report. Something deeper, something human. Evelyn stood slowly and turned to leave, but before stepping out of the SUV, she spoke one last sentence. "Your badge doesn't define you, Daniel. Your actions do. Choose them wisely." As she stepped back onto the sidewalk, Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest, only to be replaced by a new one. A responsibility. A promise. A chance to rise. But the real test awaited him in Part 8. Where the investigation, the public outrage, and the truth would collide. Internal Affairs moved faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, Daniel was told to report to headquarters for questioning. He didn't sleep the whole night. His thoughts kept circling around Evelyn, her voice, her calmness, her pain. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her kneeling on the road. Every time he opened them, he remembered her gentle words inside the SUV. He felt trapped inside his own guilt. When Daniel entered the building, officers stared at him like he was a stranger. Some looked curious, Others disappointed, a few angry. Word had spread everywhere. Everyone knew about Evelyn Brooks, the respected social worker. Everyone knew she was the one who stopped Daniel from spiraling into a violent path as a teenager. Everyone knew she had helped half the neighborhood. And now the whole city knew that the boy she once saved had forced her to kneel. The hallways felt colder than usual. When Daniel reached the Internal Affairs office, 2 investigators waited for him. One was a stern middle-aged woman named Detective Mira. The other was a younger man named Louis who looked like he had already judged Daniel long before he walked in. They motioned for him to sit. "Officer Daniels," Detective Mira began, "you understand why you're here?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We have multiple videos, several civilian statements, your own partner's statement, and the chief's report." She tapped a thick file on the desk. "Before we go through any of it, we want to hear your account. No excuses. Just the truth." Daniel took a deep breath. "I made a mistake," he said. "A big one. I overreacted. I acted without proper cause. I let the crowd pressure me. I let my ego decide my actions. And I harmed a woman who did nothing wrong." Detective Mira leaned forward. "And what about the fact that you knew her?" The question cut deep. "I didn't recognize her at first," he said quietly. I should have looked more closely. But I didn't." "Do you believe you used excessive force?" Louis asked, arms crossed. Daniel hesitated, not because he doubted but because saying it out loud felt like ripping open a wound. "Yes," he whispered. "I did." Detective Mira watched him for a long moment, searching his face. "Do you know what surprises me the most?" she asked. "She refused to file a complaint. She defended you." Daniel's eyes lifted in shock. She did. "She didn't want you punished," Louis muttered. "She told us your actions came from fear, not hatred. And that fear is something you can fix." Daniel's throat tightened. Of course she had defended him. She always had. Even when he didn't deserve it. Detective Mira continued, "But the public doesn't see it that way. We have protests forming outside. Community groups demanding consequences. The media won't let this go." Daniel swallowed hard. What will happen to me?" "That depends," Mira said. "On your integrity, and on her." Before Daniel could ask what she meant, a knock sounded on the door. A moment later, Chief Hernandez stepped in. "Evelyn Brooks is here," she said. Daniel froze. "She's here?" Chief Hernandez nodded. "She asked to speak to the investigation board. And to you." Daniel's heart pounded. He stood instinctively. I'll talk to her." But Hernandez raised a hand. "Not yet. Sit." Daniel obeyed. Moments later, Evelyn entered the room. She wore a simple gray dress and held a folder under her arm. The investigators stood respectfully. She was calm, composed, unshaken by the crowd waiting outside the building. Daniel couldn't look at her at first. Only when she sat down did he lift his eyes. She gave him a soft nod. Detective Mira spoke. "Miss Brooks, thank you for coming. You may speak." Evelyn opened her folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She didn't look at it, she already knew what it said. "I am here because I believe in accountability," she said softly. "Not revenge. Not destruction. Accountability." She turned to Daniel. "He failed. But failure is not the end unless we choose to stay there." Louis scoffed slightly. "With all respect, ma'am, the public wants his badge." Evelyn looked at him gently. "The public wants justice. And justice is not the same as punishment." Detective Mira leaned forward. "What do you suggest?" Evelyn took a slow breath. "I request that Officer Daniels keep his badge, but not without consequences." She turned to Daniel. "He must face the community. He must listen to those harmed by the system he represents. He must work with me, not as a cop but as a student again, to relearn compassion, patience, and responsibility." Daniel's eyes widened. "You want me to work with you?" Evelyn nodded. "Only if you are willing." Daniel's voice broke. "I am." Detective Mira exchanged a look with the chief. "This is unconventional. But it may save him," Hernandez murmured. Evelyn spoke once more, her voice steady. "And it may save others too." The room fell silent. Internal Affairs had expected anger, accusation, or punishment. Instead, they witnessed forgiveness powerful enough to shift a man's entire life. But Part 9 would reveal whether Daniel was truly capable of becoming the man Evelyn believed he could be. Daniel walked out of the Internal Affairs office with Evelyn beside him, not as a protecting figure, but as a silent reminder of the responsibility he now carried. The hallway outside was packed. Officers watching quietly, civilians waiting to hear news, reporters whispering behind glass doors. The moment they saw Evelyn, the crowd parted in respectful silence. But when they saw Daniel, murmurs started again. Some looked disappointed. Some looked curious. Some looked angry. Daniel didn't blame any of them. He had earned every stare. But Evelyn kept walking, calm and steady, forcing people to move out of her way with nothing but her presence. Daniel followed her, feeling the weight of every step. He wasn't sure if he deserved to walk beside her, but she didn't once ask him to stay behind. Maybe she believed he needed to feel this silence, this confrontation, more than any punishment internal affairs could give. When they stepped outside the building, the sunlight hit them like a spotlight. Protesters stood behind metal barricades, holding signs. Respect our community. Justice for Evelyn. End abuse of power. Hold officers accountable. The moment they saw Daniel, voices erupted. Shouts. Accusations. Questions. Do you feel proud? Why did you do it? Is this how you treat your own mentor? Daniel lowered his head, ashamed. Evelyn lifted her hand gently, not shouting, not demanding, just lifting her hand. The crowd quieted almost instantly. It was the kind of influence no badge, no gun, no rank could ever achieve. Evelyn stepped forward. I know why you are angry, she said softly. And your anger is justified. The crowd murmured, confused. No one expected her to openly validate their frustration. She continued, but anger without direction only spreads pain. What happened was wrong. But this city doesn't need more walls between people. It needs bridges. Her voice carried across the square, soft but solid, like a warm wind passing through cold hearts. Daniel watched her speak, mesmerized. She wasn't defending him. She wasn't denying what happened. She was reminding everyone that change didn't come from punishment, it came from understanding. And that was harder than justice. It was deeper. It was braver. When she finished speaking, Evelyn turned back to Daniel. You have a long road ahead, she said quietly. And you will walk every step of it. Not because the department demands it, but because you know it's right. Daniel nodded, eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. I'll do whatever it takes, he whispered. Evelyn gave a gentle smile, the same one she used to give him when he was just a lost teenager sitting in her office. Then let's begin. And so their new journey started. The department assigned Daniel to community duty, real community duty, not paperwork or patrol shifts. He attended workshops, sat in healing circles, learned about trauma responses, learned about compassion, learned about communication without force. Every week he met with people who had experienced police harm. He listened to their stories, really listened, and sometimes their anger fell on him like rain. He accepted it. He absorbed it. He learned from it. Evelyn guided him through it all, not as a protector but as a teacher holding him to the highest standard. Some days she was gentle. Some days she was strict. Some days she asked questions that broke him open from the inside. Why did authority matter more to you than humanity? What were you afraid of losing? What part of your past shaped that reaction? Many nights Daniel went home exhausted, emotionally drained, unsure if he could continue. But every morning he came back. Not to prove anything to others, but to prove something to himself. Slowly people began to see the change. The arrogance faded. The fear quieted. The pride loosened. He learned to communicate before commanding. He learned to ask questions before giving orders. He learned to see people, not threats. Months passed. One evening, after a long community session, Evelyn and Daniel walked outside the building. The sky was orange with sunset. Daniel, finally strong enough to say it without shame, spoke softly. I wouldn't be here without you, he said. I wouldn't be alive without you. And after everything, you still didn't give up on me. Evelyn looked at him with a gentle expression. I didn't save you, Daniel, she said. You saved yourself. I only pointed you toward the right door. You were the one who chose to walk through it. Daniel felt tears fill his eyes. I won't fail you again. She shook her head with a warm smile. Don't promise perfection. Promise growth. Daniel nodded slowly. I can do that. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. Then you've already won. They stood there in the warm, fading light, mentor and student, no longer divided by a uniform or a tragedy. Instead, united by the same thing that brought them together years ago. Hope. A quiet, powerful hope that one person's compassion could change a life. And that sometimes, it could save too.